Death Stranding 2 stands out as one of the most impressive technical achievements on PS5. This game pushed the boundaries of what could be achieved visually without relying on cutting-edge techniques like ray tracing, and the team at Kojima Productions masterfully utilized the Decima engine to craft a stunning and gorgeous open world packed with ton of details and remarkable rasterized global illumination. And this excellence also extends to the characters, which look equally impressive. Now, 9 months after its release, the game finally made its way to PC courtesy of XeSS. And surprisingly, this port marks the debut of ray tracing in the Decima engine, with support for both ray traced reflections and ambient occlusion. On top of that, and for the first time on PC, we get Progressive Image Compositor or Pico, which is Gorilla's upscaling solution that's used for Death Stranding 2 on PS5 and Horizon Forbidden West on PS5 Pro. Now, when it comes to the quality of this PC version, I'd say it's better than the recent XeSS ports, especially Spider-Man 2, but at the same time, it's not completely free from issues. My first impressions when starting the game were excellent. I did not notice any stuttering or traversal hitches even when triggering new effects. The performance was consistent and the frame time graph was flat with no noticeable spikes. However, as I delve deeper into the game, several issues begin to surface. The first quirk, one that has become typical of recent XeSS ports, is the heavy load on the PCIe bus, particularly when traversing the game world. You can see this here. Every time I move even slightly, GPU usage spikes, accompanied by a noticeable performance drop. And with more aggressive movement, the game can shift from being CPU bound to mostly GPU bound. This strongly suggests inefficiencies in how the game streams data and assets. The only positive here is that frame times remain relatively consistent during these moments, unlike the wild fluctuations we saw in Spider-Man 2. There is another issue, likely related to the previous one, that happens when aiming with the sniper rifle. Notice how the game turns into a stuttery mess every time I aim and look at distant geometry. Fortunately, there is a workaround to mitigate this, which I will discuss later when talking about level of detail. Finally, there is a strange upscaling issue that occurs when switching from XeSS to either DLSS or Pico. You can see this here. With Pico on quality, I am getting around 56 FPS. If I switch to balance and then back to quality, the frame rate jumps to around 60 FPS, which is not normal. The same happens with DLSS. On quality, I am getting around 57 FPS. Switching to XeSS Ultra Quality and then back to DLSS increases performance to 62 FPS. And if I switch to balance and back to quality, performance returns to the original 57 FPS. So something is clearly off with the scaling, and looking at the internal resolutions of Pico and DLSS confirms the problem. We can see that before switching back and forth between the modes, Pico is upscaling from a higher resolution than quality, while DLSS is using the balanced internal resolution even when set to quality. Since we are on the topic of upscaling, let's compare how Pico performs against DLSS, FSR3, and XeSS at 1440p and quality mode. Let's start with this scene, which represents a worst-case scenario for the upscalers. Here, Pico struggles with the falling particles, but it handles the reflections noticeably better than the others, showing far less flickering, especially compared to DLSS. But to be fair, this flickering is mostly limited to this specific scene. Another area where Pico does a better job is ambient occlusion. You can see it here. Pico shows less AO noise in the plants compared to the other upscalers. Lastly, in this scene, we can see that Pico has some trouble reconstructing certain subpixel details. So overall, I'd say Pico performs better than FSR3 and especially XeSS, and it's a solid alternative if you don't have access to DLSS or FSR4. Let's move on to the graphics settings, starting with texture quality. This one is straightforward and affects the resolution and overall quality of textures. From high and above, the improvement becomes clearly noticeable. This is also reflected in VRAM usage, which rises significantly at high and especially at very high. On the 8GB 36C Ti without ray tracing, and in the areas I tested, high runs without issues, while very high introduces noticeable frame time spikes and stuttering. So if you are using an 8GB GPU, I recommend sticking with high, and if you start noticing sudden performance drops or stuttering in certain areas, drop it down to medium. As for texture filtering, as always, this setting has a noticeable visual impact while its performance cost is negligible, so just leave it at 16x. Next, we have shadow quality. This one affects shadows draw distance and how many distant shadows are rendered, with a noticeable improvement at medium and high and less so at very high. This one also affects local shadows, with Portable removing most of them as you can see here. Performance-wise in this scene, there is around a 5% cost when going from Portable to very high. So given that very high does not provide a noticeable visual improvement, I recommend keeping this one at high. The second shadow setting is shadow resolution. As the name suggests, this adjusts the resolution of shadows, affecting how detailed and defined they appear. The impact is subtle when going from portable to medium, noticeable mostly in the character and distant shadows, while high and very high show a more significant visual improvement. Performance-wise, there is a small 2% cost from portable to high and a larger 10% hit at very high. So similar to shadow quality, I recommend keeping shadow resolution at high. The final shadow setting is screen space shadows. This option adds subtle shadows to fine and small details that are often missed by traditional shadow maps, which helps give the scene more depth. And screen space shadows are not very expensive to render, so I recommend leaving them enabled. Moving on to ambient occlusion. Turning this one off has a very negative impact on the overall look of the game, making everything appear noticeably flat. Very high covers more corners and surfaces compared to high, while ray traced ambient occlusion adds even more coverage. But side by side, as you can see here, it's really hard to tell the difference between high, very high, and ray tracing. Performance-wise, there is about a 5% cost from off to very high. Surprisingly, RTAO does not add any noticeable performance costs beyond that, but it does increase VRAM usage. And with 8GB of VRAM, using RTAO with high texture quality can lead to noticeable frame time spikes. So if you are VRAM limited, I recommend prioritizing high texture quality and keeping ambient occlusion at high. Next, we have reflections. In this scene, increasing this setting improves the coverage of screen space reflections, while very high increases their resolution and clarity. When it comes to the ray tracing options, the results are mixed. On water surfaces, both RT high and RT very high can actually look worse than the regular high and very high, as some objects are missing in the reflections. But this isn't always the case. In other scenes like this one, the ray traced options add more accurate coverage with reflections that are missing with the regular options. And here we can also see that the RT options help resolve some of the typical screen space artifacts. The downside is that RT high introduces additional noise on reflective surfaces, which can become more noticeable when using upscaling. In terms of performance, there is around a 4% cost when going from off to high. RT high performs similarly to very high with around a 12% cost, while RT very high comes with a significant 30% hit. In scenes with more complex reflections, the gap between these options can be even larger, as you can see here. So generally, I recommend high as the main option. But if you have enough VRAM and some performance headroom and don't mind some added noise, RT high is also a good option. Let's move on to level of detail. As usual, this one controls the polygonal complexity and mesh quality of both nearby and distant objects. When it comes to popping, it's barely noticeable on close objects and mostly affects distant geometry. High and especially very high reduce LOD pop-in compared to the lower options. Performance-wise in this scene, there is around a 4% cost when going from portable to medium, 8% to high, and 13% to very high. But that's not the full story. As I mentioned earlier, there is an issue that shows up when aiming with the sniper rifle, and level of detail seems to be the main culprit. Here with very high texture quality, we can see that very high LOD leads to sudden VRAM spike when aiming, resulting in stuttering and hitching, while using medium and high don't show this issue. The same thing happens on the 36C Ti, as you can see here when using medium texture quality, although it's less severe since we're not close to the VRAM limit. But switching to very high textures makes the stuttering much worse even at high LOD. So for this one, I recommend avoiding very high. Stick with medium or high, and if you're still noticing stuttering when aiming with the sniper rifle, consider lowering texture quality as well. Next, we have terrain quality. This one affects the quality of parallax and bump mapping applied to ground surfaces, which directly changes the bumpiness and overall surface detail of the terrain. Performance-wise, there is around a 5% cost when going from low to high, and surprisingly a much larger 15% hit at very high. So for this one, I recommend medium or high. Moving on to cloud quality, this one adjusts the resolution and detail of the game's volumetric clouds. At low, there is noticeable breakup and noise, while medium and the higher options deliver much cleaner and more stable clouds. Performance-wise, going from low to high costs around 6%, while jumping to very high carries a massive 32% hit. Since medium already looks good enough, there is no point in spending extra performance on the higher options. So for this one, I recommend medium. Let's move on to volumetric lighting quality. This one only shows a noticeable visual impact in certain scenes, like this one here, where low disables most of the volumetric lighting effect, resulting in a less atmospheric look. Performance-wise, it doesn't seem to have any significant impact, so I recommend leaving it at medium or high. Lastly, we have translucency quality. This one primarily adjusts the resolution of specific particles and special effects. While the visual difference can be noticeable in still shots, it's much harder to tell side by side during gameplay. However, the performance impact can be quite heavy, especially in intense scenes with heavy storms or dense particle effects. That's why I recommend leaving this one at default.
Time to shine, Sam.
So given everything we've discussed so far, these are my recommended settings for Death Stranding 2. Now let's compare the performance using these optimized settings against the very high preset at 1440p with DLSS quality, high textures, and no ray tracing on either side. In this scene, we can see an average performance improvement of around 48% with the optimized settings. Here in another scene, the gap is smaller, about 28%, but it's still significant considering the minor visual difference between the two sides. Finally, in this famous and demanding scene, there is an average performance difference of around 32%. Before ending the video, I want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon. If you are able and would like to directly support my work, consider becoming a patron to get access to the highest possible quality of my latest videos, including this one. And a big thank you to all my supporters, and thanks to you as well for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if not, leave a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.